I'm Brian from Scale Doctors, and I'm going to show you how to assemble and install your ScaleKeeper. ScaleKeeper is very easy to put together and install. It really comes down to attaching a scale bracket to the scale, and we use double-sided adhesive that's already attached to the bracket. Then we're going to attach the wall bracket to your wall with the included fasteners. This has to be at the correct height, but we don't need to do any measuring to do this. I'll show you how that's done in a minute. And then once both brackets are attached, it's just a matter of taking the mechanism, attaching it to the scale bracket, and then the wall bracket is attached at this end. And we're all assembled and installed. It's almost that easy. But there's a few things that can get you when it comes to putting this together, and I'm going to cover that, give you some tips and tricks to make your installation a little easier. But before that, I'm going to answer the question I get asked the most, and that is, will ScaleKeeper work with my bathroom scale? And to determine that, it's really a matter of looking at where this is going to attach. Don't try to do this with the old style mechanical scales. It really needs to be a digital scale. Most digital scales are built very much the same. There's not a lot of difference. There's some differences in the features they have, but the construction is all very similar. So why a ScaleKeeper might not attach to your scale? These pads have to attach to the flat part of the scale. As long as they can attach to it, it should work just fine. So if you notice this scale here, it has a really big, thick trim around it. But the trim is narrower than the span of the bracket, so it does work with this one. It's 5.5 inches from this edge to this edge. So as long as the trim is less than 5.5 inches, it should work with the scale. There are a few scales where the trim goes all the way across and you don't want to stick it to trim. It needs to go to the structured flat piece on top. There's another scale I've seen out there that's a perfectly round circle. And the round circle doesn't give you much room for the adhesive to stick to. The corners are all cut off. So if you've got a big trim piece at the top, or if it's a round scale, I wouldn't recommend ScaleKeeper for it. But the weight of the scale doesn't make any difference. We have this really big, heavy one. It works just fine. So the weight isn't a requirement. It's really, can this attach to the top? And that's the first step in putting this together. In order to put in the wall bracket, we have to have this part already attached. We use this scale assembly with the bracket to determine the height of the wall bracket. So, let's show you how you get this stuck on and do this properly. The key thing to this bracket is probably the key piece in it, is that it has to adhere to the scale really well. And to ensure that, the top surface has to be really clean. So clean off the top of your scale. Then we want to make sure we get this square with the scale. We don't want this at an angle, because if we stick this on at an angle, when you flip it up on the wall, it's going to be at an angle on the wall, and we don't want that either. But there's some features on the bracket that will help you get it on very easy and nice and square. If you notice, this part of the bracket's a little bit thicker than this portion, the little arms that stick up. That gives you a little edge across here. And before we peel off the release film, we're going to practice first. We're going to angle it back. This way, even if the release film wasn't there, it's not going to stick and grab to it first. So we're going to tip it up at an angle. And now, once I catch that edge, I can slide it back and forth. And it's always staying square with the scale, but I can move it back and forth until I get the same distance on each side of these. And once I do, I can roll it down and stick it. And then I'm going to press it down really firmly. And I'm going to keep pressing, make sure it's down good, but then this needs to sit for at least 24 hours. We can continue with the installation, but we want to make sure that this sits overnight. I'm going to show you too, if you don't like the idea of just eyeballing this, or if you maybe have a scale like this one you can't even see the display. When you wake it up, it'll show some numbers, but I don't know where the edges of it are, so it's kind of tough to guess where the spacing is. So what I would do on a scale like this one is I would put a piece of masking tape on here, and then a piece of masking tape on the back. Then we'll measure the width of the scale, mark the line of the center of the scale, and do the same thing here. Measure the width, mark the center line of the scale. Then when I'm rocking it back and forth, once the two lines are aligned to each other, I can rock it down and stick it. And now I know I've got this in the center of my scale. There's some scales, they're all similar but not the same, where this one here is a little bit trickier of a scale to attach it to. None of the sides are flat. Although we really only care about the top one, but each one is aren't. So this makes it a little tougher. I'm going to demonstrate it on the bottom, that when you're trying to attach the bracket, it doesn't really stay square, it can rock. And that's a little bit more difficult. So the way I installed this one is I put my tape across here. Oh, and it does look like it has some trim on here, but it's perfectly smooth. It's below the glass. It's just, so you kind of have to pay attention to the pictures and see if that really is a raised trim. It might just be decorative underneath the glass. So anyways, what I did was put my tape across here, measured the halfway point, did the same thing on the bracket, and then it's a matter of, I was kind of lining up the line on here, but then I look at the little gap that's between the bottom of the scale and this edge out here, and I try to make that gap the same on both sides. Then I rocked it down and pressed it. And odds are I didn't get it perfectly square. But it doesn't really have to be, because the scale bracket, or wall bracket I mean, has a little bit of give to it. The bottom mounting hole is a slot. So when this is mounted in the wall, we can rock it back and forth by that bottom hole and then square it up. And that's one of the last steps we're going to do in the installation. So now that we've got how we're going to attach the scale bracket to the scale, so even though I said let it sit, we're going to continue the installation with it, because in order to determine the height of the wall bracket, we need to bring the scale with the mounted scale bracket to it. So your scale bracket is attached. Now we're going to actually attach the wall bracket to the mechanism. And we just slide that down and you'll hear it click, and it gets trapped behind this little post in here with the wedge shape on the top. And we can always release this mechanism from it by pushing down on that and then lifting this back up through. It's very easy to take on and off the mechanism and scale from the bracket. Just slides right through. Now we're going to attach this portion of the mechanism to the scale bracket. We're going to slide it in until that clicks, and now that's attached. So one of the neat things about the mechanism is the only time when this mechanism, the wall bracket and the scale become perfectly 90 degrees is when it's in its fully extended position. So if it's not fully extended, it's not quite 90 degrees. It reaches that at the very last moment. So how we determine where this wall bracket goes onto the wall, the height, is we extend the mechanism, and we don't need to stretch it and make sure you don't have to stretch it, just make sure it's opened up all the way. And we slide the scale with the mechanism until the wall bracket is hitting flat on the wall. Now we'll notice that this wall bracket can slide up and down. So what we're really trying to do is place this wall bracket somewhere in the middle of its travel. And there's a couple of notches on the wall bracket that we can line up with the top two of these surfaces on the piece that's attached to the mechanism. So we can put that right in the middle. Now this is the location for the top hole. So we're going to mark this hole. Then we're going to move it out of the way. And I've already got one installed here, so I'm going to kind of use this as an example. To keep this quicker, I already have an installed one on this board. I'm going to take out this screw, and I'll show you how to get to the second screw. Because we can't get to the second screw, if you notice, when this is in the up position here, the mechanism is blocking that bottom hole. So we're going to install the top hole first. So using the supplied anchors or screws, if you're in a hollow drywall, you're going to install this anchor first. That's going to go all the way in, and you just use a Phillips head screw. You can turn it in with this tip of the point. You don't have to do any drilling. It'll go right through drywall. You can push it through, screw it till this is flush. Then, if you're on a stud, you can just screw the screw in, but we're going to leave it sticking out a little bit because we have to get this bracket back behind there. So you don't want to put this all the way in. Or if it's going into the anchor, you screw this into the anchor and still leave the screw sticking out a little bit. Now we need to take the wall bracket off of the mechanism. So I'm going to push that little wedge, pull it out. So now when I hang this on the wall, to determine where the bottom hole is, I hang that from the top hole. I can use a scale, a level if I want, to make sure this is square to the wall when I mark the hole. But like I said, it's pretty forgiving. But once I get that, you have to watch out that you don't slide this back too far because it's wider at the bottom where these arms come out. If you're out here thinking, oh, you're measuring it with that down too low, you're not going to be square. So you want this in the flat part of the bracket. So level out your bubble. Now you can mark the second location. Once you do that, you can take your bracket back off, get it out of the way. You're going to put in the second fastener, the anchor and then the screw, or just the screw. And we're going to put the bracket back on, and we're only going to snug this part down. We can't make it too tight because we don't know if we still need to adjust it on the wall. So we can tighten the top one down a little more than the bottom. But it can't be too loose. If it's too loose and wiggling, when you try to, we need to put it in the up position, and if this isn't snug enough, it's gonna move on you when you go to take it off. So we're gonna try to get it centered here. Gonna snug this down a little bit so it has a little bit of tension, but it still moves. Now I'm going to reattach the bracket. I'm going to put it in the up position, and now I can grab by these arms on the wall bracket, see, and I can change the angle of it. So once I get it how I want, I can now be careful and pull it up to release, bring it down, and now I'm going to take this bracket off again. Now I can do the final snug down on the brackets. And you don't need to turn these too hard. They actually stick pretty good to the wall by themselves, so just kind of snug them in. You want to make sure it's not going to come upwards because when you pull up on the scale, it does hit on this thing, and it'll. So as long as that's fairly snug, you should be good to go. This is almost the last step. We do have this all squared away, but one thing we have to do next is we include a sticker. If someone comes to your house or another family member or something, they'll look at this and not have any idea how to use it. And people are curious. The first thing they want to do is they want to pull it in this direction. And that's not how this works. This has to be pulled up to unlock. Then you can set it down. Same way to lock it. You push it up, then you pull it up to unlock, and then it'll catch in and lock. So we're including a little instructional sticker that shows that you have to pull up or down or push it down to unlock and lock. And I recommend putting it at the top of your scale somewhere or on your wall just above it so that someone that's not familiar with it will know how to use it. Because like I said, people are curious and they'll just want to pull it off. And that was kind of the main flaw with the previous version of ScaleKeeper. This is a new design, that it was breaking if someone pulled on it. But this one here, I've designed the bracket so that it will break loose without damaging it. But you can't get it back there by just pushing it. You need to pull up to lock it back in. So that's really how you put one together, how you install it. Now, once you've done this, we're going to take it back off the wall because we got to let this sit for 24 hours. So you use the little release again, pull it out of there. You can still use the scale by stepping on it if you really needed to weigh yourself. But give it time to adhere, and then tomorrow you can attach it and start using it every day. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'm glad to answer anything you have to ask me about ScaleKeeper. So, thanks for watching.